Good evening, everyone. Can everybody hear me, even in the back? Yeah, thumbs up. Good. Yeah, I have the pleasure of moderating this fireside. So many people know Lee Jin as the internet famous Andreessen Horowitz investor. Many also know her as a very experienced product builder from her time at Shopkick, and as a Harvard educated market philosopher. For me, I know Lee as a close friend and a confidant and a comfortable shoulder to lean on. She's definitely the type of person that I would love to partner with any startup I'm building. In fact, for my first failed startup, went to her for my seed round, and she definitely passed. But she chose to invest in a friendship. Oh my God. There we go. And that's meant a lot to me, in all seriousness. So tonight, Lee will share some of her groundbreaking thinking around what she has termed the passion economy, which is a new addition to the canon of the future of work thinking, and basically that has to do with individuals being able to convert themselves into large businesses. And digital creatives are becoming more and more dominant across the social web. And so join me in welcoming the brilliant Lee Jin. So Lee,
Brandon.
Who are you? Can you tell us your origin story?
Definitely. Hi, everyone. I'm Lee. Thanks so much for coming tonight. I know it's rainy and gloomy, and so it's very easy to flake in circumstances like this. So I appreciate all of you guys being here tonight. I'm so grateful. So I'm a relatively private person on social media, except when tweeting about the passion economy or marketplaces. So probably few of you guys really know that much about my personal life or my history. So I guess I'll share that for the first time ever publicly. So I was born in Beijing, China. I lived there till I was 6 years old, which meant that I completed kindergarten. And I like to say that going through kindergarten in China basically covers your entire elementary school and maybe middle school education here in the US. So after being like a relatively okay, mediocre student in kindergarten in Beijing, I came to the US and was considered like a very talented student all of a sudden in America. So I moved to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania when I was 6 years old because my dad was in his PhD program at the University of Pittsburgh. We stayed in Pittsburgh. They're still in Pittsburgh. I grew up there. Started off living in downtown Pittsburgh when my dad was a grad student. Experienced basically every level of American society, from living as a family of 3 on a grad student stipend. And then as the years went by and he graduated and, we entered the middle class, we then also geographically correspondingly moved outside of the inner city to the various suburbs of Pittsburgh. And I lived there until I was 18 years old and then went to Harvard, where I came in as a wide-eyed, super honestly frightened 18-year-old, felt totally out of my depth, was exposed to, for the first time in my life, to people that I had never encountered from, suburban Pennsylvania. Harvard was an eye-opening experience for me in every single way, and I'm so grateful that I went there. But it was also just such a transformative experience, I would say. And so I basically explored every department, every career that one could possibly ever explore in college. I started off studying English. I wanted to become a journalist. I wrote prolifically for the Harvard Crimson, reported for 40 hours a week there, skipped all my classes to call all of my sources. And then midway through college, one of my mentors who worked as a professional journalist and editor told me, what's a smart Harvard girl like you doing in print media? You need to find another industry. Do not pick print media as like your full-time job. And I was like, but I love this. Like, I love writing so much. Like, I can't imagine doing anything else with my life. But then upon further reflection about the broader industry dynamics, I decided to follow her advice and, went to investment banking, which everyone does, for a summer at Harvard. Hated that, decided to try something else, did marketing at Rent the Runway for a summer, then found my way to Capital One for my first ever full-time job doing corporate strategy. Have to say that I did not go to Capital One because I was passionate about like credit or financial services, even though I know a lot of people are. I went there because of a financial need, which was that I wanted to go to Rent the Runway for my full-time job, but I just could not make the salary that they were offering me work. Like, I don't come from a background where my parents could support me, and so I had to take that offer that was given to me for financial reasons. So I basically stayed for a year to the day and then came out to California in 2013 to work at a company called Shopkick, which is, at the time, it was a startup. It was incubated by Kleiner Perkins and then backed by Greylock. And I initially joined as a growth analyst, their first ever growth analyst, analyzing like all of their experiments. This was like the days before amplitude or mixed panel, and so I was like calculating p-values by hand. And then became a PM and did that for almost 3 years. And so worked across every aspect of the app, which was in the offline loyalty and rewards space. And that taught me everything that I know about building products. And so after 3 years of doing that, I came to A16Z in 2016, where I've been ever since. And so now I work at A16Z on the consumer investment team, focused on marketplaces, and then more recently, this thesis around the passion economy, which I'm really excited in. So I think that hopefully gives everyone an overview of my life.
Thank you. So, that was supposed to be funny. What is one secret that people might be surprised to know about you? Could also be a fun fact.
Let me think about that. Can we come back to that question? I'm seriously struggling.
You are? Okay.
Yeah.
We'll come back to that. Save it for the end.
So who here has actually read anything by Lee? Tweets, blog posts, by a show of hands? So obviously nobody knows who you are. So let's actually talk about the passion economy. So rapper and mogul Jay-Z has this lyric that goes, "I'm not a businessman, I'm a business man." Right? You know, it's true. And really, if you think about it, maybe in there is packaged a compelling market thesis related to the enterprisation of consumer. So Lee, what exactly is the passion economy? What are its origins, and maybe what is its future? Can you give us an overview?
I think you just summed it up perfectly. I don't know how, like, if it really needs to be explained any further beyond that, but that was a perfect summary. It's basically people as businesses. Mm-hmm. And so the passion economy idea is broadly about this idea that in the future, more and more people are going to be able to make a living doing what they love. And specifically, I'm very passionate about the creative economy and people who possess a creative skill, and how are they going to be able to monetize those skills in the future. And the reason why I'm particularly interested in creatives is because for much of human history, people with creative talents have only been able to monetize that talent through intermediaries. They've had to go through central distributors like talent agents or movie studios or art gallery owners or agents of some sort in order to access the broader market. And the beauty of the internet is now that people with any sort of special passion or talent or skill or ability that anyone in the world wants to tap into and access in some way can now connect to that audience directly without having to go through a middleman. And so the passion economy is really about how do those people connect to that audience and how do they monetize that. So I'm really passionate about future platforms that are giving people this ability to find work and to monetize their own talents and their passions.
Mm-hmm. And it seems like, in a way, people can monetize some of their talents right now. When we think about like the gig economy, we think about things like TaskRabbit or Thumbtack or even Uber is a canonical example. But in what ways do the gig economy differ from the passion economy?
Right. Yeah. So the thesis of the passion economy, I would say it didn't come out of nowhere. It came from me looking very closely at every single marketplace company that was basically out to raise in Silicon Valley for the past 3.5 years. And my observation during that time was that a lot of these marketplaces of the last decade or so, they've unlocked huge markets and they've unlocked so much consumer demand, but what they've really struggled with is acquisition on the supply side. And that's because on the supply side, a lot of people don't actually want to do that job. Like, they are jobs in a lot of cases that provide financial earnings and are very easy to get started on. But on the other hand, they're one-dimensional. They don't fully utilize your creativity or your intelligence or your education. And so a lot of these gig economy platforms have struggled with supply side acquisition and retention. And so I started seeing more and more marketplaces and more platforms that talked more about their strategy of supply acquisition being that they offered them a way to actually express and monetize their individuality and their education and their special talents in a way that wouldn't have come through on previous gig economy platforms. And so that was really the genesis of the insight that led to the passion economy thesis. And when you sort of compare and contrast a lot of like gig economy platforms versus passion economy platforms, I think a few key differences really stuck out to me. One is that I think on a lot of gig economy platforms, the customer doesn't actually care who the provider is that they're working with. Like, you probably cannot name the last like 3 or even 1 Uber driver that you had. But whereas if you're supporting a creator on Patreon or subscribing to them on Substack, you probably know exactly who those people are. It very much matters to you as a customer who that individual that you're purchasing from is. And so one of the key differences is in the level of individuality and personality that comes through on passion economy platforms versus the gig economy platforms. I think another major difference is, as a worker, how can you get leverage and how can you grow your business? I think on gig economy platforms, that key leverage point just consists in doing more work, spending more time, doing more rides, doing more deliveries, just scaling the amount of time that you're spending. That's the only lever that you have. Whereas on passion economy platforms, the way to grow as a business is to offer something of greater value, provide something that your customers want, provide something better, more differentiated, or to grow your audience, to reach a bigger number of people. And so those differences were really exciting to me.
Yeah, I think you're right, because I can't remember my last Uber driver's name, but I can remember the name of the guy. I took a highly rated React class on Udemy, and the instructor's name was Andre, right?
Yeah.
And you brought up Patreon, right? What are some other examples of really awesome companies that are germinating or mature in the passion economy space? Maybe even names that we haven't heard of that are killing it in China, or stuff that's happening here in the States. Can you just walk us through some awesome examples and stories that you've seen?
Yeah, for sure. So when people ask me what is the largest company in the passion economy today, I actually say Shopify. Mm-hmm. So Shopify is a company that I point to that is really the epitome of the passion economy, in my opinion, because so Shopify, for those you don't know, is an e-commerce platform that makes it really easy for anyone to start selling online. And I think it has a market cap of like $40 billion. It's doing like 15 million in GMV every quarter. It has like almost, I think, 1 million merchants using the platform. So it's really, really massive. But if you hone in on the metrics, the average seller on Shopify is actually very small. So Shopify is this platform that has been built on very small, individual, a lot of times sole proprietor businesses that are able to access customers because of Shopify. I did the calculations, and I think the average GMV per merchant on Shopify is something like $72,000 a year. So from their Shopify store, they're making less than $100,000 per year in just gross sales. So that just gives you a sense of like, these are all like very small, individual, like the most S of the SMB. And Shopify has been able to grow and scale with some of the businesses and is now powering a lot of larger merchants. But I think Shopify is a great example of like a company that has gotten really big in this space. I also point to, so I think Shopify is interesting in that they've enabled a lot of merchants to easily monetize physical products and build their own differentiated online store selling physical goods. What I'm really excited by is passion economy platforms that are making it as easy to sell digital goods or digital services that are not linked to something offline. I think it's harder for me to think of an example of a company that has really gotten to scale off of that idea. Like in the physical goods world, there's Shopify, there's Etsy, there's Amazon Marketplace. But when it comes to services or digital products, I think that space is wide open for all of you, frankly. Like, I think the biggest examples are probably Patreon, where people are subscribing and giving money directly to creators. Udemy, Twitch. Twitch is obviously quite large. And then there's a super long tail of everything else. So in our portfolio, some of the companies I'm excited by are like Substack, the paid newsletter platform. We invested in a jewelry marketplace called Pietra that's actually now helping influencers and people who have an audience to launch their own collections. So they come to Pietra with absolutely nothing but an idea, basically like a Pinterest board. And using Pietra, the idea is that they can then design their collection, manufacture it, bring it to market, set up an online store. We're also investors in a stealth company that I cannot name yet, but is making it really easy for people to build and host and organize online conferences. The idea being that there's a lot of knowledge influencers out there who have expertise in something, and the only way that they can monetize it is, or to reach people, is through offline events like this. And wouldn't it be great if these people who had knowledge could share that with the entire world and monetize it at scale by hosting online conferences over video?
It's useful. So it seems like one thing I'm interested in is like, there's people who are building these platforms, but then it also requires the work of individual creatives to like actually drive these platforms. Can we talk about what are some of the hard, like it's not just you can just have a passion and a dream and just like all of a sudden you're successful. There's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears like under the surface before like a YouTube influencer can monetize like an ASMR channel.
Yeah.
Right? Or, you know, what are some of the fundamentals for digital creators to be successful in this new economy? What does a new ethic of work look like to be successful in this new paradigm of productivity?
Right. So I'm really inspired by Kevin Kelly's blog post, 1,000 True Fans. Like, I keep talking about that nonstop. I think it's very complementary to the idea of the passion economy. And I'd recommend that everyone read it if they haven't. But the idea of that blog post was basically that as a creator, as someone with this special creative talent, you don't actually need millions and millions of fans around the world in order to be financially successful. All you need is actually 1,000 true fans. And the number 1,000 wasn't exact, it was just an estimate. But the idea is like you actually just need a small number of people who are willing to purchase whatever it is that you might produce. But because of the internet, you can basically capture 100% of the profit from their, from whatever it is that they're buying from you, and make a living easily off of 1,000 true fans. And so the math that he did was 1,000 fans times $100 in profit per fan equals 100K of annual income, which to most Americans is a very decent living. And so back to your question, I think it's about finding those 1,000 true fans of yours on the internet as a creator. And I think as a creator, tactically speaking, I think it requires use of social, like broad horizontal social platforms, to distribute whatever it is that you're creating and to basically market yourselves and to find who might be interested in actually purchasing something on top of all of the free content that you're offering. So I think there's like a very complementary relationship between social platforms and then passion economy platforms, because the social aspect basically functions as lead generation and marketing for a lot of these creators who then seek something else for monetization.
Okay, so on this idea of passion economy, maybe we zoom out. We can have more of a theoretical kind of conversation. We have, if you look at like U.S. history, we have different epochs of work, right? We have kind of like an agrarian, early, 1776, we have like agrarian and like involuntary servitude period of work. Then we have like a industrialization and manufacturing period of work. Then with the advent of like the internet, we have different ways for people beginning to make money online, and then the gig economy, and then obviously now the passion economy. In what ways do you think the passion economy will, what impact will the passion economy have on like our collective societal values and the way we think about rugged individualism and the way we think about productivity? Like, how will that influence our relationship with work when, like 50 years from now?
Mm-hmm. I love that question. In many ways, I think the passion economy is a reversal of the Industrial Revolution. So during the Industrial Revolution, there was this fundamental shift in production from where production basically moved from individual people's homes, where they created everything that they needed in this agrarian society, to large-scale factories in urban areas where all of a sudden people by the thousands work together to create something, and everyone basically produced a small element of something and they made it at massive scale. I think the passion economy is about returning to this era of, it's almost like this era of history before mass production and before people were just cogs in a machine, each playing a tiny, tiny role in creating something that was mass produced. We're returning back to like handicrafts and things that people produce on their own. And I think in that way, the passion economy captures the best of like the pre-industrial revolution era, but it also enables people to focus on the specific thing that they want to produce, and they can reach people at scale using the internet in a way that wasn't possible pre-internet. That was a long rambling answer.
That was good. So also at that level, thinking about...
And just to continue on that. Sorry, this is how my brain works. I say things and then I'm like, actually, I want to say more.
Sure.
In regards to our relationship with work in the future in 50 years.
So thanks for sharing.
I think
really
entrepreneurship is going to be a much more accessible path.
So my
to many
question
more
is, do
people
you
than
think
before.
in the new passion economy,
and I think
actually is there
the creative work in
a benefit to
particular,
existing platforms or
where people can
marketplaces?
create something
For example,
individually
like
and
Uber,
actually
they
make
already
money
have
off
so
of
many
it,
drivers and
is going to be
passengers
a viable
using it
career
every day.
path.
it's probably
so many
easy
people.
for them to maybe if they
I
want
think
to
back
start
to
like teaching
my time at
languages to,
Harvard
like,
when
the passengers while they're on the rise, they
you
can
know, all
push a
of the
button and then
professors and
they
the
can
president
connect
of
this
the
to
school
the
would tell us,
passengers.
like, you should
So
just study
do you
whatever it is
think,
you're passionate
they have
about,
an advantage? So
whether
as
it be
as
history
maybe
or
most of us are
literature
aspiring as
or creative
entrepreneurs,
writing, because if you
should
just
we
follow your
focus on
passion,
building the next
you'll be able to
middleman for
monetize
passion
that and
economy,
find
or
a
should we
fulfilling
actually
career from that.
explore
And we all
something
thought, like,
along
that's
the way
total
of
BS, and we all need to go
helping
into investment
people
banking.
become a better
Because
person,
let's
or
be real, like, the
something else?
creative pursuits aren't going to pay the bills. I think in 50 years, hopefully, we can get to a point where that's actually advice that's true and people aren't going to scoff at it. That's my hope.
So then, I'm curious. You mentioned like these career paths. Like, what does? Can you name like 5 careers of the future in this passion economy? Like, what are people doing? Like, are people like? What does it mean to be a virtual reality chef and be making money? Like, what is this? You know, can you paint a picture?
I think we're already seeing some really interesting careers emerge that people would have never imagined would be viable career paths. Like Twitch streamer, obviously, is a big one. Now we have people who are actually making like a really, really decent living on Substack as a full-time newsletter writer. Like, I think Ben Thompson sort of broke open the floodgates of what that looks like, and many people are realizing, like, oh, actually, I have expertise to share and I can monetize that through a newsletter. I think podcast creator was, for a long time in the history of the medium, viewed as a hobby, as something that you did nights and weekends because it was never going to make you any money. It was just a labor of love. And now, because of new platforms that allow podcast creators to sell individual episodes or to sell subscriptions, people are actually making a living as a podcaster. Hopefully, online conference host is going to be one as well, enabled by our new investment. And probably so many others that I can't even imagine. I think even of people like us sitting in this room discussing these ideas, when out there in the universe, there's probably so many people in the world who would love to participate in this conversation today, but are unable to because they don't physically live here or they couldn't get here. And in the future, what does it look like for me to be able to reach those people at scale and to maybe turn that into my full-time living? I don't know, but it's interesting to think about.
Can we talk a little bit about like? There's a few like macro forces that might be acting in the near future on the evolution of the passion economy. So like, Gen Z is breaking all the sacred rules about how individuals make money on the internet, flipping Instagram accounts, like doing a lot of wild stuff, right? You also have another macro forces maybe in the next. People talk about an economic downturn in the next like year or something like that, right? And then you also have a separate third macro conversation about like the potentially erosion of trust in big social media giants. So like, how do any of these kind of forces impact the trajectory of digital creatives being able to do their best work on it online?
I think there's a lot of secular trends at play. I think Gen Z is definitely a big piece of it. I've heard of them being referred to as like the side hustle generation, where like something like 50% of Gen Z have a side hustle. They're really interested because of witnessing their parents' generation lose their jobs during the recession and go through all of this financial uncertainty. They're really interested in entrepreneurship and how to make a living and cobble together different sources of income in a more sustainable way. I think you also have the fact that there's eroding trust in all of these large horizontal ad-supported platforms. And there's eroding trust from both users as well as the creators who have grown up on these platforms. I see all the time, like, you know, Instagram creators saying like turn on notifications for my post because they don't trust the algorithm. They don't trust that Instagram is actually going to surface their content to people who've expressly followed them. I think you also have, you know, another trend, which is automation, driving people towards, you know, fields of work that are more creative in nature, that are less automatable. I think you also have like our addiction to screens and to digital interactions driving people to seek more fulfilling relationships. And for a lot of people, creators represent that relationship with another human being. And so I think all of those secular trends are at play. And so I'm less worried about the impact of something like a recession. In fact, I think a recession could even accelerate the development of this industry because I think people are going to seek alternate ways to monetize themselves and to become an entrepreneur and to start their own business in the case of a recession.
So we have a lot of founders and aspiring founders in the room. Like, what are some of the non-obvious insights, or like some of the places that are more underserved in this whole canon of conversation? Like, what can be built? Like, what should people be thinking about building potentially?
I'm really excited about new platforms that have the potential to create an entirely new class of work. I think if you look back on the major companies that have been built in the last decade, they all basically invented a new type of work. So it might be Uber driver, Lyft driver, Airbnb host, Dasher, TaskRabbit, person. But these platforms gave rise to an entire professional class that did not used to exist. And so looking forward, I think when I look at startups or when I talk to founders, I'm really excited by the ones that are developing and enabling an entirely new type of career that didn't used to exist, and monetizing a skill or an ability or expertise in some really novel way that I think could have like this huge market expansion potential. So that would be my advice to founders. And then the other aspect that I think to think about, which is probably less intuitive and obvious, is I think in America, culturally, there is a stigma against like making money in many ways. And what I mean by that is it's often like socially frowned upon for people to charge money for something. And I think that's because historically a lot of these creative services have been offered for free. And so if you take a look at a platform like Cameo, for instance, where celebrities are charging to do paid shout outs to their fans, and a lot of people are using Cameo to monetize, I think you also have another segment of creators who frown upon that usage of Cameo because they view it as like potentially cheapening or brand dilutive to have such a clear price tag on their time. And so for any company in the passion economy space, I think you have to navigate like that tension, the tension between giving people the ability to monetize while still navigating the existing like social beliefs that people have around paying for something that historically probably would have been for free or inaccessible.
Mm-hmm. So a couple last questions on the passion economy, then we move maybe to some more personal questions, and then we'll go open up to the audience. So what would you say, you're very bullish on the passion economy. What would you say to people who are more skeptical?
I've definitely gotten a lot of skepticism, and after I published the Passion Economy blog post on the A16Z blog, one of the top responses that I got from skeptics was, sure, like this is happening, but aren't you just cherry picking the top few examples? Like, how many people can actually make a living doing this? How many people can actually turn their passion into a living? Like, sure, there are people on Substack making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, but like, how many people does that actually represent? I think my response to that is I haven't done like the quantitative analysis or study of like, pre and post these platforms, how many creators exist. But if you were to ask me like, how many people 20 years ago or 50 years ago could have made a living from being a writer that, just monetized 1,000 people, like back then versus today, what is like the number of people that could potentially make a living from doing that? I think there's probably like an order of magnitude difference, and there's a huge unlock that's happened. And so for me, it's like that question I don't think is very useful to ask or to think about, because I think the market size is huge. Like I think about the market size of a platform like Instagram, which has 1 billion monthly active users. And I think of all of those billion monthly active users as people with some sort of latent creative impulse. Like these are all people who want to create and share something with the world. And like out of that billion people, obviously some of them are going to be able to monetize. And maybe not everyone makes a full-time living. Maybe for some people it's just a side hustle and like they earn some, token amount from it, but it's still something. I think people tend to equate like, if it's less than 50,000 or 100,000, it's not meaningful. Well, for actually most of America, it is meaningful.
Okay, so different topic. So we have a lot of people in this room are trying to wayfind and who are trying to surmount their own obstacles in life. And maybe you could share a story about a time you overcame something, or you had a mistake or a failure that informed or inspired where you currently are today.
Brandon gave me this question earlier, and I was like, I don't know how to respond to this, because like, even despite, everything that I told you guys, I feel like I've had a relatively lucky, privileged upbringing. Like compared to most of the world, I definitely do. And so I don't want to make it seem like I've overcome some incredible obstacles to get to where I am today. I think I have had like a lot of uncertainty in my life, and like lots of not even missteps, but like my whole life and my entire career has been this process of trial and error and never really knowing what my next job was going to be until I got it. Like that's been the case for every career change that I've made. And so for all of the advice about making like a 5-year career map for yourself or setting out like 10-year goals, I think that's like the most bullshit advice ever, because I had no idea 10 years ago that VC was even an industry. Like I got to Shopkick and I didn't even know that product manager was a job until I got there. And so I would just say like embrace the journey and be open to all of the possibilities, and just go with the flow, and like you'll find it in the process. My other major learning from working now for almost the past decade has been that I think your career is relatively deterministic, meaning like you get out what you put in. And like I've always found that my career was like I knew that, I could just succeed by working harder. I could do this project, I could take on these initiatives, and like my career was relatively predictable. I think personal life has been this whole other story where it's completely non-deterministic and people behave in ways that you would never expect. And like, no matter how much you want to will something into existence or work harder at it, it doesn't actually correspond to a straightforward output that you would expect. And I guess the learning from that is like, it's also important to embrace just like what the universe is telling you, and to stop trying to make things happen necessarily.
Thank you. So with that, I think we have time for a few questions here. I don't know if we have a mic that's going to go around. Okay. So do you want to take the first question?
Sure. It's on? Yeah. So thanks for sharing. Really passionate about the fashion economy. So my question is, do you think in the new fashion economy, like actually, is there a benefit to existing platforms or marketplaces for example, like Uber, they already have so many drivers and passengers using it every day. It's probably easy for them to, maybe if they want to start like teaching languages to like the passengers while they're on the rides, they can switch a button and then they can connect this to the passengers. So do you think they have an advantage? So as maybe most of us are aspiring entrepreneurs, should we focus on building the next middleman for passion economy, or should we actually explore something along the way of helping people become a better creative person or something else?
So to be clear, I think the gig economy is not going anywhere. I think obviously Uber is still going to be a huge company, and I think there's such incredible demand for transportation services that that's still going to represent an income for so many people out there. I think the passion economy is additive to that. I think like for every Uber driver out there, there's probably a lot of people who want to make a living doing something else. And so I think I would put the gig economy in this completely orthogonal bucket. And I think there is an opportunity to address maybe some of the gig workers who are less satisfied with different aspects of their job and to provide retraining. But I think I'm less worried about gig economy platforms not existing or like a mass poaching of all of their workers or anything like that.
Do you want to pick the questions? I'll let you pick the questions.
Yes.
So Shopify works because of the businesses that are on it, right? And so you had said like the average is 70K, but that's an average, right? It's probably a very asymmetric. So I'll start from the very beginning. Okay, so Shopify is a marketplace, and it works because of the businesses that are on it, right? And you said the average is 70K, but that's probably like a really asymmetrical distribution. So likely there's whales that would be bringing in much more than that. So my question is, as an investor, are you looking to invest in platforms, or are you also look to invest into the businesses that are part of the passion economy that are actually scalable, and they're using that marketplace as a means to reach more customers?
I think primarily we're interested in the platforms. I mean, especially with a fund of our size, we definitely want to invest in companies that can become billions of dollars in valuation. And it's hard to identify individual specific businesses that are utilizing those platforms that can get to that size and scale. I think like one of the unique examples of like a passion economy business might be something like Kylie Cosmetics or like a Goop. But even those, I think, cap out at a certain level, right? Whereas the platforms have much, much bigger potential. So we're much more interested in companies that have platform potential.
Thank you.
Oh, yes, you back there.
So thank you for your talk today. I took a bunch of notes, and I also believe in the unbundling of Instagram, so it's good to hear. And so my question is, so I'm building a startup that deals directly with your investment thesis around the passion economy. And one of the challenges I'm running into when I speak to these passionate folks are that they say a refrain, something similar to, I don't want to turn my hobby into work. And I wonder if you've heard that phrase before, and maybe it's associated with the stigma of making money, but maybe there's some other insights that I could glean, because I'm still kind of digging into why they don't want to make money when they are already putting in so much work into their passion.
So they push back because they would rather like not monetize at all?
Yeah, it's kind of like an art. And so
Yeah.
this is their hobby, this is fun, this
Right,
is art.
right.
And if they turn into work, maybe it's not fun anymore.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've heard that.
I haven't heard that refrain as much because I mostly look at startups that already have creators on board who want to monetize themselves. So obviously there's a selection bias. I think for a lot of people though, their hobby is just a hobby, and they might have another source of income that represents their primary livelihood. And they don't actually, like, turning their hobby into a living and replacing their source of work with their hobby or their creative, outlet would require so much more work that it seems like not worth the effort. So
perhaps like the friction
yeah,
and turning into your hobby into monetization.
I would even put myself into that bucket. So I've studied painting since I was 5 years old. I paint on my own. Everything that I create, is not for sale unless someone's willing to pay an exorbitant price for it. But it's something that I've never monetized. And it remains a hobby to this day. And I do it, on my own time. And maybe the venture job is funding my artistic hobby, but it's never really, I've never viewed that as a career for myself, because I think to be successful as an artist, there's just so much work that still is required that goes into that, and maybe some people are similar to that.
It's helpful. And then follow-on question, what's the best way to contact you if you want to chat more?
Yeah, so you guys can all follow me on Twitter. To be fair, my DMs are open, so I actually check my DMs, and that's how I've met, a ton of great people in my life. So it's LJIN18 on Twitter, or you can email me directly. It's lee@a16z.com. Yeah.
So I almost feel like there's two types of passion economy companies, right? There's the medium example where they go where they grow a user base and then they allow people to monetize, and then there's Patreon where they focus on monetization for creators from the get-go. Which one do you feel is better? I mean, do you agree with the distinction, and which one do you feel is better? Should passion economy companies give tools to creators to monetize from the get-go, or should they allow them to grow a user base and further down the road in 5 years give them tools to monetize?
So I think there are different categories of companies in the passion economy, but I wouldn't draw the distinction the way that you did. I would actually draw a distinction between SaaS platforms versus marketplaces instead. So I think of SaaS platforms as the Shopifys of the world that are enabling people to use their platform to start their own business. They get all of the tools, but really they're the ones that are responsible for growing their business, for building an audience, for finding all of their customers. Whereas the marketplaces are the ones that you just sort of plug into, and the marketplace feeds you customers and is responsible for driving an audience to your page and to your product or service. So an example that highlights this contrast is probably something like Udemy, which is a marketplace for education, and anyone can sign up to be an instructor and offer an online course. And Udemy is like the front page of all of that aggregates together all of the courses that you use as a consumer to search for what it is that you want to take. On the SaaS side, there's platforms like Teachable and Podia that enable you to create and sell your own online course. But with using Teachable and Podia, you have to bring your own audience. You're the one responsible for driving all of your own traffic. The flip side of that is that it's much cheaper for the creator than a marketplace that takes like a percentage of all of their earnings. But I think the way I think about it is the SaaS platforms are probably better for creators who have a built-in audience, who are more in the head of the distribution, who can drive their own customers, and the marketplace is better for emerging creators.
I think what we'll do is we'll take two more here. I think this lady in the back has been waiting for a while.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing your story and your passion for the passion economy. So in addition to marketing on social media, what are 3 to 4 core actions creatives should take to monetize today compared to 2 years from now?
Sorry, can you repeat the question again?
So in addition to marketing on social media, what are 3 to 4 core key actions that creatives should take to monetize today compared to a couple years from now?
I think this isn't 3 or 4, but I think the key mindset shift that I think needs to occur among creators is the shift from a patronage mindset to one of actually providing value for your customers. So I think like all of the crowdfunding models of the past decade and maybe even Patreon are really capitalizing on this this desire, this altruism really in the users to support a creator that they like. The benefit though is really to the creator themselves. The creators tapping into sympathy, altruism, selflessness among their customers to pay for something and to support them without getting that much back in return. And I think to unlock a dollar amount of spend from users to actually be able to represent a sustainable living for creators, I think creators need to focus on actually providing more value to the user instead. I think most people are more willing to pay for things when the benefit is for yourself versus for someone else. And so I think for creators to be successful, they need to tap into that desire for users to better themselves, whether it's like bettering themselves in terms of their fitness, financial life, health. Like people have infinite willingness to pay when it comes to something that's ROI positive, when it's about improving themselves versus just supporting someone. So I think this is the recipe to get people to pay a lot more and for creators to actually make a living.
One last one. So we have questions there and here.
I'll let you pick.
I feel like we haven't done any from back here. So do you take the awesome last question? Well, I think we need it for the recording.
Thank you. So my question is that I do think a lot of these platforms are bringing an audience to creators, but then it's incumbent upon the creators, like you're saying, to teach consumers or users how to value creative content. And I guess I think that might have to be done through a business model that has been different than it has been so far, which mostly has been either ads or patronage, like you're saying, or subscription models. Like, how do you think about how business models should be different in order to help consumers and users value the creative content? Maybe in the context of some of the cultural issues with doing that today, like you mentioned.
Yeah, I think that's like a really, really great question, because I think the ad-driven model of social has basically trained the general public to devalue a lot of content, to expect things for free, to expect, a ton of content for absolutely nothing. Like, I read this amazing article the other day online about how Instagram influencers are the new unpaid internship. Like, if you're creating content for Instagram and you're trying to become an influencer, you're basically taking on this unpaid internship, because at the end of the day, you're benefiting the platform. You're driving a ton of valuable content. You're driving all of your audience to come back to Instagram and to open the app and to spend time on it. And that turns into advertising revenue that Instagram gets, not you as the creator. And so I think creators have wisened up to this in the last couple of years, and are exploring ways to educate their audience about that dynamic. Like, I think of all of the Facebook groups that have reached a size and scale where they've basically become a full-time job for all of their moderators and their admins. And a ton of these Facebook groups are now trying to pull off of the Facebook platform and set up their own standalone communities. And they get a lot of pushback from their members when they try to do this, because the members ask, like, why would I pay for this when it's free right now? Like, why would I want to download another app when I already open up Facebook every day? And I think it's incumbent on the creators to be really transparent and honest and open about, here's the level of work that I'm putting in to moderating this community. It's not free. Like, every single member represents like $100 or whatever of revenue per year to Facebook. Like, if you actually value the work of this community or this creator, like, you should be willing to support it directly rather than paying with your time and attention to this platform for whom like none of the benefits actually are accruing back to the community. So I think it's like the creators, I'm seeing them like educating their audiences about the true cost of all of these social platforms.
I think that's all we have. Round of applause for Lee, everybody.
Thank you so much, Brandon.
I'm sure she'll stick around if you want to talk to her one-on-one.